With the loss of leisure centres, youth centres, Dudley Museum and the cutback to Dudley Library's opening hours, what facilities will be left for the young people of Dudley after the budget cuts, and what will this mean for their futures?
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. I'm going to break this into 4 parts. The first part is taking the liberty of standing up to address you, and many of you may not notice the difference being only 5'5" over here. The second is to amend the question to add the words Dudley Hippodrome, because I think it's very relevant to the points putting forward. The third is to do what no politician here this evening will do, is actually answer the question in 1 word, and then fourth, for the time remaining, is then talk about reasons for that and what we need to do. So I'm stood up. Hopefully you can notice the difference. I've amended the motion to add Dudley Hippodrome. The answer in 1 word is none. Nil, zilch. 3 words, 1 word, 3 different connotations. Why is that? Well, this isn't the ranting of a party political broadcast. Let's go to the Local Government Association, Conservative controlled. What they state is by 2018-19, this council will be a statutory provider. That means it will be funded to pick your bins up and look after your children. Every library, every hippodrome, every leisure centre, every museum, no longer funded. In fact, we can go further. The voluntary sector significantly cut. Community cohesion significantly cut. Austerity, by its very definition, talks about living without comfort. Well, I'm going to challenge you to say not all of us are actually living without comfort. This present government, let's look at a couple of the facts. If I lived in Tewkesbury, I've seen the support from this government in this last year go up by 3.2%. In Dudley, it's been reduced by 7.4%. So in Tewkesbury, I can have a discussion about the Hippodrome, their version, or the library, or the museum, and I may be able to find some funding for that. Tewkesbury, of course, the more affluent of our communities, a deliberate political ploy. Let us look at some of the other facts. In Dudley, we have seen our funding cut by £65 million. In the next 3 years, will it go up to over £100 million? That equates to every individual in Dudley Borough £61. £61 for each and every adult in this borough. Windsor, £18. So you can start to see the deliberate political tactic. Now what we need to do, and this is a challenge for every one of us within this room, is to campaign for that alternative. The first challenge is don't put the blame on the local authority when it's the direct result of national government cuts. Why else can it be that certain local authorities are funded disproportionately to authorities like Dudley? The solution is absolutely clear. We need an anti-austerity agenda. One where the 99% in our society are looked after and we expect the 1% to pay their fair way. Thank you.
Cheers. As Peter said, I really like to stand up and talk because actually to address people you stand up and talk, and actually this is a big issue, and when a big issue happens you stand up and talk. So I've got 3 names and 3 ages in front of me. I represent the Youth Council, as they said, I'm the chair of the Youth Council, also a member of Youth Parliament. I've got 3 names in front of me. Dan, 23, has a disability, a physical disability. He's still supported by the youth services because the youth services support to 25 with a disability. He wants to go to a club in 2016. He wants to go to a club at Valley Road Youth Centre in Stourbridge. No longer able to. Sorry, we have no money. Lucy, 14 years old, coincidentally, the name and age of my sister, wants to go to a dance lesson. Parents can't afford it. Sorry, we've got no funding for that. Connor, 12 years old. I want to represent young people. I want to have a voice. If the cuts in 3 years' time are the same as they were 3 years ago, I guarantee you we wouldn't have youth councillors dotted around standing in front of you talking about austerity. Austerity is hitting young people the hardest. We are the future generation, right? We need to make sure that youth councillors, youth workers, the youth offending unit, and making sure that they have the money to do what they do. I've got two youth workers that sit in the back of the room that support us as the youth council. They are brilliant people, okay? They give up their time. Yeah, they're paid, but they give up their time and they support us thoroughly. And actually, without them, I wouldn't keep on track. But what I would say to tackle austerity is going to happen. Whether we like it or not, for the next 5 years, we've got a government that wants to cut funding. Okay, it's going to happen. But what I would like to say is, when the Dudley Youth Council don't have money to do things, we go out and find people who'd like to sponsor us. We go and fundraise. We go and find money from somewhere else. And what I would like to see is councillors going out to go and get grants, to go and find money, to provide these services that are vitally important to young people. And that is what I would like to see towards austerity. Thank you.
To follow on what Pete and Connor said, we do have a lack of money. Nobody's got any money at the moment, anywhere, central government, local government, anybody. I think it's also interesting what Pete said, that his solution for this is to call a general election. And while I may agree with most of the policies of the current government, we can't really have much influence in Dudley at the moment, so that's a different issue altogether. I think the focus is on local issues at the moment. What Connor said again, I do agree with, that actually in the youth council we are funded to a certain extent by the main council. We are not directly funded, we are funded through the youth service, through the use of centres, the use of this chamber, for example. We've not had to pay for this because actually we've got a link, and I think that's quite right. The solution that we have to run things like our awards is actually we do go out and we do fundraise. And I know there are restrictions on the things that councils can do. They can't, go and shake a bucket, but actually there's a lack of inventiveness within both the council and in central government for the ways to do things. Actually, just because the service is provided by the council doesn't mean there shouldn't be a service. It can be provided in a different way, in tandem with the council, with the knowledge that somebody like a youth worker has. Actually, that knowledge isn't about the training they have, it's about the personal connections they have with the individual and the personal connections they have with the area. If they're all sat, then you might as well just get rid of the youth service altogether, because that knowledge is gone then. So what we need to do is we need to look about a way to sustain that and make it different and make it inventive. And I know that's something they have been working on again in the youth service, because it's something we work with. But I think there needs to be an acceptance that things need to be done differently, but it doesn't mean they have to be cut. So that's my take on it.
Does any of the panel want to come back on what anybody else has said? Okay,
Yeah, standing up again. I forgot to mention what main part of the question I look at when I see Dudley Libraries and I see Dudley Museum. Now, the Dudley Libraries, quoting the Express and Star, more than 200 hours a week will be lost from libraries across the borough under the current plans. Now, for people who don't have the money to have a brand new computer and don't have access to the internet, which I agree isn't many young people nowadays, but it still happens, they won't be able to go to the library after school or college and think, oh, I need to go and do that homework, I need to go and do that bit of research. They won't have that available to them. They won't have the thousands of books available. Now, I am not an active library user, I will admit it, but there is somebody on the youth council who is an avid library member. She's there all the time, literally. You go, where are you, Rosie? She'll go, oh, I'm at the library. So that is something that you can't just cut things like that. And then second of all, the Dudley Museum, you may have seen a petition. If you look at my Facebook or Twitter, cheeky plug, you'll notice that I'm actively making sure that this petition is everywhere. Because actually, as Pete said, the council has to cut things, and that statue thing in 2019 means that the Dudley Museum that's got hundreds of years of heritage, gone. Where does it end, I guess?
I'm going to start a new trend just by sitting down for this one and see whether that catches on. as the first one. I mean, firstly, we need a little bit of realism. We need to wake up and smell the coffee. Hopefully it's fair trade coffee, but you need to wake up and smell it. The one contributor with regard to grants is absolutely appropriate and is absolutely correct. If anybody goes outside from here, you can see the marketplace, which has had over £8 million worth of grant funding in order to do that. Our libraries, if you go to Warsaw, Conservative controlled administration, every library has been closed. We've taken the innovative route in Dudley of actually going through mutualisation, actually handing control of the libraries over to the people what know the libraries best, the staff themselves. It's going to be part of a management by it. Actually, I believe, got all party support in this authority. We've established very small businesses, areas such as, for example, Uni 360 in my area in Stourbridge, one of the largest indoor skate parks, brought up with private and public investment. But if anybody is under any illusion that you can save a museum or keep your libraries open at this current area, or indeed invest in Dudley Hippodrome, when you've had over £60 million taken off you. If we go back to 2010, for every £1 we had then, next year we will have 30p of that pound. That puts it into context. So let's do your petitions by all means, but let's aim that petition at the right people, not the authorities that would actually like to keep and indeed invest further into those areas, but to the real culprit, those that have decided to cut Dudley whilst increasing investment in Tewkesbury. Those who decided to cut Dudley whilst reducing that cut in Windsor. It's very, very simple economics, and it's economics of the privileged few as opposed to that of the many. And that is a real argument that we've got to take out to the streets, is to find that alternative. Because if we don't, what we will do is we will actually have a negative impact on community cohesion, because we will start to go to that lowest common denominator and start to see what divides us and what separates us, rather than what we should be doing is what actually unites communities and what we've actually got in common.
I think, again, as he keeps emphasising, I'm sure the cuts are coming from central government, and that £60 million is wrong. I do fully agree with what he said. However, Pete hasn't actually given us a solution as to how we deal with these problems. All he said is, come on, man the barricades, get your flags out, off we go. That doesn't give us a solution for the local issues. And I agree with what he said about, central government putting these cuts in, and I don't agree with their policies, as I've said before, but actually that doesn't give us a solution. Tewkesbury has nothing to do with Dudley. That's, down south, leave Tewkesbury alone, I'm sure they're very happy. But actually it's got nothing to do with Dudley. So what is the solution for Dudley? We can't just keep saying, well, we're calling an election, we need a solution.
Before we go over to you, I do want to just say another article from our favourite Express and Star. Opposition Conservative Group Leader Councillor Patrick Harley has hit out a ruling Labour group for making miserably cuts which will affect well-used services. He said this is an old-fashioned budget set by an old-fashioned Labour Party who believe that they can cut services to the bone whilst blaming anyone but themselves.
Yeah, to come back firstly on I would staff the barricades. I wouldn't personally man the barricades. But the answer isn't. I haven't called for a general election. I don't think I've said that. What I've said is fair funding between local authorities, and I believe that Dudley should be viewed no better or no worse than any other local authority in the country, and that would have about £25 million worth of impact immediately within Dudley. To answer Patrick's point, it'll be interesting to see what Patrick says with regard to the budget, especially as he's feeling that he may take control next year. But all of those, the comments I've given you this evening aren't by the Labour Party, they're actually independent groups. One's from CIPFA, the others from the Local Government Association for themselves. So the facts are the facts are the facts. With regard to what should we do, well, firstly we need to have equal funding, so we need to have an equal playing field, so all people are deemed equal, as part of that. And then we need to look towards alternatives. We need to work with the voluntary sector about how we can actually look towards transferring some of the duties that we currently do on a non-statutory basis over to the voluntary sector in order to start to look towards them taking part of that. We're actually doing that at Bromley Hill Civic Hall at the moment. If anybody goes over there, where we've got the Civic Hall is now being run by the local authority. We need to work with the private sector. We're actually working through the local enterprise partnerships at the moment, where we're looking at multi-million-pound investments around, for example, connectivity, so we can actually get very light rail into Dudley, so we can actually get people out of here and into appropriate work, because every house that we build, people pay council tax, and that money can then be reinvested in there. But it comes back to the central point that we need to be treated equally. No better, no worse, equally.
Right, for the panel, we're going to Connor, and then we're going to the floor, and I won't say it again. Okay.
Yeah, I just want to really quickly pick up on the point about equality. If the council is going to set a budget equally, then why are we spending endless amounts of money on refuse, and why are we spending endless amounts of money every single time I walk to school on a Tuesday morning when the bins are collected? I see a brand new bin collector thing. Right, that's all well and good. I understand that you've got standards that you need to meet, having this vehicle that's, you know, at least not over 2 years old. But if that vehicle's still functional and we're going through austerity measures, why are we buying new bin lorry things when we're not funding things like youth offending units, which are really important and really integral to reducing youth crime rates?
And we'll take questions from the floor. Does anybody have a question? Oliver.
Okay, going back to the question, it says, what facilities will be left for young people of Dudley after the budget cuts? So my question really is, and obviously I'm not going to ask specifically figures, but in youth services for young people, what services are being most affected by the cuts? Because obviously there's a lot of services for young people, but I'm not entirely sure, and I don't know about anyone else, but I'm not entirely sure what services are being cut specifically and how much by, because, you know, we might be funding a service that's not being used much and giving them a lot more than something that's being used a lot and they're getting less.
Any more questions?
Do you still think that austerity is helpful and it's leading to so many problems in our country as a whole and leading to deaths?
I'm going to say this is more of a statement than a question. I'm a former youth councillor, I'm a former member of the youth parliament, and I am now supposedly an adult, okay? Why do I feel like I'm listened to more as an adult than as I was as a young person? Because I'll ask this to any aspiring politician who, you're all in the youth council, it is amazing. Do you feel listened to? How many years have you been fighting to save the youth service? Now this is to all the politicians that, councillors or MPs, if they're still here, why is the young people fighting for the youth service for so long when sometimes adults can fight for it for 2 years and get what they want when the young people can't?
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. First, quickly answer Connor's point. One is a statutory provider, refuge. The other is a non-statutory provider. With regard to what services will be left with regard to use, the simple answer is there will be none by 2019-20 because we will simply be a statutory provider, which I think partly answers. What are we looking at for this year? We're actually looking at all of the youth services. Now, the commitment that we've got from the current administration is we want to protect as much as we can. And part of the reason why we need to go over these cuts sooner is because if you can actually make those changes in a speedier time, I think it's part of the point that was raised at the very end, then you can do your utmost to try and protect some of those services. So by announcing the closure of the museum, for example, it's hopeful that you can actually replace and re-site that museum to actually keep the artefacts on public display. And that's one example of why, whereas if the cut came in 12 months' time, when no savings have been made, it would simply just be cut and taken away. I take a note with regard to the point of the transition from a young person into adult. I take it as a statement. Personal interest, I'm an advocate of votes for 16-year-olds anyway, which means that maybe you'd have got to that position slightly earlier.
Okay, I picked up the question about austerity and what it's doing, and it's actually killing people. I went on the radio back in 2013. Don't listen to it, my voice is still squeaky. And I made a mistake. I completely embarrassed myself. And actually the figure in 2013 was there's over 30,000 food banks across the world, across the country. That's appalling that people have to feel the need to go to a bank where the food is held. Now, brilliant on our community for giving food to those food banks, and wow, what an outstanding thing we have, especially at Harvest. You'll see all the primary school kids bringing in all these tins of different things, but why should people have to go to food banks? To go over to the chair before myself, Sammy, the reason why young people have to fight for what they want is because they're not electorate. We're not over 18. We're not 18 and over. We can't vote, so they think, right, we'll give the voters what they want, so then when the voters have got what they want, they'll vote for our party. And that's party politics. We aren't party political, we're issue-based. And what I think is important is that we've been fighting for our youth service for years. It's now more than ever. The figure at the moment is 16,583 young people voted in our Make Your Mark consultation, which happens in 7 weeks. Right? The previous year, we had more funding, so we got 18,007. Now, looking at those figures, last year it was 58.99% of young people who voted in that consultation. And actually what that proves is that young people do want to be heard, young people do want to be seen, and young people do want a voice. And as you would know, being in youth parliament, it's really hard to actually try and get those young people heard. Collecting 6,600 myself this year is a really big achievement, but actually what you think of is, how proud am I to represent those young people? To that 6,600 people saying, you know what, you put a cross on that ballot paper and you've had your voice. So yeah, that's basically it. Cheers.
I suppose what Connor said is right, really. I think if you look at the breakdown of services in terms of central government and local government, the group that actually have done well out of the austerity is actually generally the over 65s in terms of tax, pension relief and those sort of things, and that's because it's well known and that's a group of people who vote the most. So the solution is twofold, really. One, you need to get young people more involved, and actually you need to get politicians to recognise that they will lose a generation of young people who will be voting for them in the future, because all the people who sit here now at some point in their lives have had an individual, a politician, a friend, a family member who inspired them to say, right, I want to make a difference in my community. I want to go out there and I want to make a statement about what I believe, and actually I hope people will agree with me and they'll elect me. And you know, whether it's Mrs. Thatcher or Tony Blair, you had that leader, you thought, right, I want to be that person, and actually at the moment young people don't have that person because they think I have no influence over what happens, so why would I bother? Why would I get involved? So in 20 years' time the country will be led by career politicians, which is what is already happening and is what is not good for people, because actually those people don't understand your lives, because they go to university, they come straight out and they go into politics, they don't understand what you do, what you feel, what you need. Therefore, you need to get young people involved, because actually you'll lose your electorate. Voting rates, not just for young people, for the nation as a whole, has gone down so much. It was something like 65% in the 1950s, if not more. The number of people that voted then, because people had fought and died for that right to vote. Women, men, anybody had died for that right to vote, and now people are so disengaged, they feel that they can make no influence, and actually events like this tonight are so useful because it gets people engaged. I think that's the main thing we have to take out from this, is actually the fact that people who've come out tonight and got involved is the first step on the path to recovery from austerity and from this lack of interest, I think.
5.5 minutes, but we are running over by 7 minutes.
Well, that's the end of the austerity panel. So, thank you to everybody who's on the panel, and we will move